Hello everyone. Today, the paper I am sharing is a interdisciplinary research on how management theories, for example, public service management theories, can contribute to education, specifically higher education. A very hot topic in higher education, which is how to increase and improve students' engagement. So the author reviewed a lot of models and theories in public service and management, and how private companies improve their customer experience. And they use those strategies and practices in the management to inform the current practices and policies in higher education in terms of student engagement. And as you can see, the authors are due from business school and Department of Marketing. And they're basically doing this interdisciplinary papers. And another thing to note is that, very interestingly, this journal, Studies in Higher Education, is kind of longer than the other educational journals. On average, 2 pages longer, which means kind of 1,000 words longer. And I find that recently, when I read any paper in this Studies in Higher Education journal, I will spend more time. And when I share a video about that article, it will take me around 20 minutes, sometimes even more time than if I'm reading other more kind of shorter articles in other journal. So that's a interesting finding to just share with you. So as a brief summary, the abstract says this article is about exploring student engagement in higher education, and they bring up a lot of case in the UK. And then they pinpoint the problem in the current higher education is that policymakers and researchers in higher education fail to accurately measure and improve students' engagement. And they claim that management theories can help. Because they have a bunch of theories and models already in terms of customer experiences, and they say maybe student, if not customers, they can be at least users, so that the theories from business and management field can help, specific help to more accurately measure students' engagement, and to come up with best practices to improve the real experience from students with a authentic user-centric approach. Specifically, they have three suggestions. They say, according to the business model, maybe higher education can learn to focus more on the user's experience, like the students themselves, and how the peers can help students to engage better in higher education, and how employees, including academic staff and faculty member, can support in the process of improving students' engagement. So that's the abstract, but I think the abstract is too short to actually summarize the whole paper, because the whole paper brings a lot of reviews of literature and case studies on those theories. Many real life cases from a private company, and compare them with higher education practices. So it is actually a lot of fun and very informative to read the whole paper, 18 pages. So in the introduction, the authors set up the problematization of this article, which is there is debates around how higher education should improve, and research around student engagement, while the problem is there's not a very critical discussion around how current behavioral analysis is being conducted in terms of studying student engagement. And we also need more empirical studies to more accurately measure this student engagement data. So that's the introduction, very kind of very brief summarization of that introduction. And then they talked about specifically focusing on how it is important to measure and conceptualize engagement, because there is a problem like how do we define what is engagement is actually already complex, and there is no agreement or consensus across educational researchers already. And then they promoted this co-creational actor-to-actor perspective based on management field of theories. And they continue to introduce that theory. And they also talked about how it could be applied to the educational field, because student engagement is a priority now in higher education, because they want to help students to get higher achievement, because there is a strong relationship between students' achievement and their engagement. And also a lot of metrics like retention rates and students' satisfaction with the university. So all those metrics are important for higher education to attract even more students to enroll in their department and institution, and then their reputational gain as well. So student engagement is a important area for education to develop. However, there are problems. So that's why this author is claiming that we need to understand more about this student engagement area, and management and marketing this new field, this interdisciplinary field can help. Um, they then argued that the first thing that higher education can do is to understand the contribution of the users, the students. And they say in their field, in their business field, customers has been regarded as the key value kind of actor, and engagement activity and can help to engage customers. And for education, it could be the same. So higher education educators might need to understand and articulate the value for students of those student engagement activities. And they should view students and learners as active agent. And they point out that there is a problem, however, because there is a lack of student voice, basically lack of qualitative measure and inquiry about students' engagement from themselves, because instead, what higher education is currently doing is measure their engagement through all their behavior analytics from the institution instead of asking students themselves. So student engagement from the student's perspective is very important, and the authors point out that highlights that with their first preposition, and they say it should be a shared and agreed view of the value users and their voices about their experience in student engagement practices. And then they continue with introducing another dimension of business theory, which is called service dominant logic. And this model basically acknowledge the importance of users' contribution, and specifically includes the operand and operand resources for users. So for in education, those means this means that the users are valued as co-creators instead of separate entities from the institution. So that's their second proposition, which highlights the co-creation relationship between the higher education institution and students themselves. They advocate that students' voice should be heard. And then they continue with kind of the third dimension from their business theory, and that is the customer's behaviors is only one part of the story, and there are more parts, for example, emotional dimension, and they bring up those cases and examples to illustrate that point. Like the first example is how emotional facial recognition software is being very successfully implemented, and it's basically saying when the software detecting if the like customer is not having a smile while they're checking out, then the software will automatically recognize that facial expression, and then automatically have some promotion or like discount for them at the checkout in order to build a positive relationship with the customer. So it's not that the end goal is the customer is buying the stuff, is checking out. The end goal is not only that. The end goal is to make the customer happy so that they can come back. So it's a partnership that the company is trying to build. So that's the first kind of example. The second example is bringing gamification techniques into the customer experience. So it's basically based on how to leverage people's natural desire for fun, for excitement, and gamification is all about those natural desires. So gamification has been adopted in customer experiences enhancement programs. And again, those gamification technique is again go beyond this transactional relationship with customers, and in order to build a partnership with their customers. And the third example related to gamification is Pokemon Go, actually, and it's bringing a large, exciting, connected community as another kind of technique, which is like community building. You have this large community so that it facilitates the customer's experience. So that's the several examples from the business area, from kind of private companies, and they say maybe education could learn from that by taking into account the user's perspective, not only their behavior but also their cognitive and emotional responses into their experiences of engagement. And that's the kind of three preposition around how higher education should be focusing on students themselves. Apart from that, the authors also argued that the impact of other key actors are also important, because value creation takes places in the network. So not only the student themselves, but also their social networks in order to capture this holistic picture of consumers' behavior. And not only that, not only social network, but also time-wise, like the present day connection will be derived, will be strongly connected to what the customer was experiencing in the past and will be experiencing in the future. So it's not only social network, but also time-wise. And cultural differences also should be considered. So they bring up this model called consumer experience modeling, which is highlighting this social network and time-wise network factors as a strategy to improve customers' experience. And it's focusing on customers' experiences, especially the interactions of the customer with other customers or peers and relationships that would add the most value to the engagement experiences. So that's the business theory that they're introducing, and then they are applying that theory into education field. And it's called, they find there are indeed already some educational literature talking about the ecological context of engagement, while it's not enough, like, because the engagement is only measured with behavioral dimension, and little analyze is on the relational, like relationship between different contexts, like including classroom, family, and like friends of the students. So that's their fourth proposition, which is kind of suggesting that education fields scholars can adopt this strategy of more relational research, like putting students in the context of a social network, in order to improve and research their engagement experience. So they continue to argue specifically about the influence of the peers for customers interaction, and how does that would imply for educational, like students in educational settings. So they say that the best experience is created with fellow customers instead of from the firm. So that's called the core first order interaction. And that's why they're suggesting educators in their preposition 5 that the engagement strategy should explicitly acknowledge the influence of the peers. And then they continue to argue it is also important to engage service employees, which in higher education case will be the faculty member and academic staff. So they say that in the marketing area, the direct impact on customers' engagement is from the service employees, and they, like employees, are playing very critical roles in terms of being an innovator, a differentiator, enabler, and a coordinator. And currently, there are so many certificates and trainings already for companies' employees to gain the skill called use of social media, so that they can bring perspective as a brand ambassador. So that's like what is happening in the business area, while in higher education the author suggests that maybe they can do the same, educators can do the same by having academic staff and faculty on board in order to improve students engagement experience. And there are already literature talking about this, like how behaviors and attitudes of teachers and faculty members can actually very strongly influence students' engagement experiences. While the problem is the empirical evidence is still not very much, not so many researchers have collected authentic empirical evidence. So they are arguing in this proposition 6 that more studies should be developed to engage the service employees into students' engagement experiences. So that's their kind of second chunk of focusing on the contribution of peers and academic employees, and to bring this ecological perspective into students' engagement research. So again, in this discussion is kind of repetitive of what they already discussed, like the two dimensions of how business theories on customer experience can provide some insights for higher education educators in terms of their students' engagement research. So they kind of summarized the problems in the current higher education, which is the student engagement is currently not so clearly defined, and we need to figure out which activities should be measured and which are the best activities and practices for improving students' engagement, and what specifically is student engagement, including what are the specific aspects of it, because it is maybe it is too complex of a concept to talk about, as maybe it's not just a single outcome. It might be more complex and having multiple layers for this single thing called student engagement. And then they also say maybe like currently the field of higher education is focusing on solely on behavior analytics, while emotional analytics could be also very valuable. And they critique that there are exaggerated and unsubstantiated claims about the impact of the current educational programs and practices aiming to improve student engagement. While it is problematic because little empirical evidence has been collected to improve, to accurately reflect the real impact of those training programs and practices. And then they say like there are several research questions to be answered. So for example, the details about the activities, which activities are most helpful, and within that activity, who are the key like value enhancers and inhibitors, stuff like that. And they emphasize that students' voices are important, and users' insights should be prioritized whenever we research students' engagement. And the limitations, they also talked about the limitations of this research, because although it is very informative and it is a interdisciplinary research bringing a business theory to higher education, there is a concern of transferring directly those like private firms practices of customer experiences engagement, transferring that, like, which is a private contest, right, into this public sector, which is like university is not a private thing. It is a public affair, a welfare thing. So there might be problems there. For example, they say educators should not be diminished or undermined because like in the business field contest, the community, like peers and family members, might be highlighted, while there is no such thing called educators in many cases for private firms. And also there is a long existed debates about whether we should view students as customers, because they're not just customers, right? They are co-creators of learning experiences. And it's education should not be competition or should not be solely economic behavior. There is a social and public kind of common goods aspect of education. So the lesson learned from business area might be kind of cautious, might be carefully adapted to higher education. So that's all about this article. Basically, the contribution, according to the author, is this article and this study with all those examples from business area and models about customer service. They say maybe it could provide insightful lessons for higher education educators, and in order to develop a robust system which captures both quantitative and qualitative insights about students' engagement. So that's all about this article, and I find it is very interesting to read. Hopefully you also learned something from this article. Thank you very much for your listening.